Okay, thanks everyone for joining us. We are here at KCD have been wanting to find ways to communicate with students and provide information, especially to our seniors, about making their college choices. And so today we have a virtual information session that we're going to provide, and we're going to get you information about what kind of to expect and hopefully answer some of your questions that you may have during this kind of unusual, these are unusual circumstances in order to make a good college choice. So we're joined this evening by Rick Clark, who is the Director of Admissions at Georgia Tech. Rick and I have known each other for a long time. We worked with each other for what, maybe 5 or 6 years, Rick?
Yeah, that's right.
At Georgia Tech before I came to KCD. So we've been friends for a long time, and he's now the director there and has done some great things. And he's going to be sharing information with you all about kind of how to make your final college decision here over the next month and a half or so. And especially during kind of this unusual time with a lot of changes that have gone on in the college admissions world. If students come in, we are going to be taking questions via chat, and then I will, certain times during the presentation, Rick is going to stop and I will read any of those questions that we have for him, and then he'll answer them, and then we'll move along. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Rick.
All right. Well, Danny, thanks for having me, and it's good to see you. I'm glad that you're doing well and healthy. I hope everyone up there is. I'm going to go ahead and switch over here and share my screen. So let me pull this up, and you let me know if you're seeing what I'm seeing. So yeah, do you have that?
We got it. Looks good.
Okay. All right, perfect. Yeah, so you're right. We got a couple good years together, and then you left, and everything's basically gone downhill after that. So thankfully, I'm not talking about Georgia Tech today, but just sort of in general. First of all, again, I'm the director of admission at Georgia Tech. You can see my Twitter handle there. I try to share out a lot of things, especially, I guess, in this time that are relevant to sort of what's happening. And we also write a blog that oftentimes addresses seniors. So no need to necessarily subscribe to that as a senior in high school, but something worth occasionally checking. I want to, I guess, first really just start by saying congratulations. I hope that, in the midst of all this frenzy and sort of weird time, as you mentioned, that hasn't gotten lost. I know we put out our regular decision, 23,000, decisions on March 14th, right as things were really kind of closing down. And, I kind of hated that in a way for the kids we were admitting, because they're amazing students and there's just so much noise right now. And so if you're a senior, whether you got admitted a couple months ago or you just recently got admitted, I know some of y'all are still waiting on a couple more schools to release their decisions. Please find a way to celebrate. Please find a way to really kind of reflect on, what you've accomplished. And that, I think, is something I would always say, but particularly right now when you're home and, normally I'm like, go out to dinner or go see a movie or do something, when you sit down and consider like all that it took to kind of get to this point. So, as a senior, I think sometimes it's really easy to just sort of go through this treadmill a little bit and keep looking forward. And maybe even as people in general, we do that too much. So, maybe you consider yourself fortunate right now to be quarantined at home and have a little time to just like cook a good meal, something that you really enjoy, and sit down with your family and talk a little bit about what everybody has done to kind of get you to this point. What you've done inside the classroom, what you've done outside the classroom, the time that you've invested. But kind of feel like this is sort of a life lesson too. Like we need to just pause a little bit more and appreciate what it took to kind of accomplish the things we do. So first, I just want you to hear me say congratulations. The other thing I would just say is, I think it's always important, when you're making big decisions, to just sort of zoom out a little bit and try to look at things really broadly. instead of right now, maybe you've been admitted to 3 or 4 schools or 1 or 2 schools, whatever it is. And it's easy to just like, I think, get narrow and start too myopic, on thinking about, okay, this or that, pros or cons, one or the other, one of these 3 or 4, and start putting stuff into, charts and columns, and everything just sort of, is too compressed. And so what I would say is take a little bit of time as you're thinking about your choices, especially for those of y'all who are still weighing your options, to kind of back up a little bit and say big questions, like, why, after all this, I've gone through my applications and I've gotten admitted, like, let me just remind myself why I even want to do this, right? Like, why do I want to go to college? Like, what am I hoping to get out of that? And, who are the kind of people I enjoy being around? And what's the type of environment that helps me kind of learn and thrive? I mean, going to a school like KCD, you've been in a place where people know you, where you know others, where it is a lot more intimate, and you have an opportunity to have these type of kind of discussions. And it is a very tight knit place. You should really consider, like, is that something you want to preserve and continue, or are you okay going to a place that is going to be a lot bigger, and maybe that's not as natural to find? Because I'm always interested and kind of amazed sometimes that students could be thinking about, one of their options being a larger public and then the other being a very small private school. And you might be somebody sitting in that situation. But asking that question, maybe that environment is size, maybe that environment is, again, kind of city versus college town. But like in general, what is the type of environment that helps you kind of learn and thrive, and identifying that? And then the last one is like, what are you hoping to do? Like, looking down the road further. So instead of just right now on picking one or another, thinking a little bit long term, like, what is it you're hoping to get out of this experience in general? And when you graduate, like, what are some of those goals? I feel like if you stop and ask some of these questions and actually write them down, or actually voice record them, or take some notes on your iPad and reflect on it. And, again, in this sort of COVID-19 timeframe, maybe you have more time to do that than you would otherwise. That can be a great place to start. So I'm hoping you'll start broad. I'm hoping that you'll start zoomed out, and then you can start zooming in more on, okay, now here are my choices. Do they match up to these bigger questions and answers? Because otherwise you end up like this, kind of feeling like, oh man, I don't want to make the wrong choice. If I kind of don't consider everything right, then I'm going to fall off. Like, I'm hoping you'll breathe a little bit, and that you won't be on this sort of tightrope, that you'll appreciate the options that you have. And then I think that's going to take you a long way. The other thing I would say is coming back to some of these type of factors. One of those being with your family, with your parents. And as you think about your options, listening to what they're saying. Okay, I've been admitted to these 3 or 4 schools. Like, let's have a real honest conversation around the differences in cost. And at this particular school, like, here's what that financial aid package is going to look like. And therefore, that's going to mean I'm going to need to take an on campus job, or do an internship or a co op, or work every summer to make sure that we're offsetting costs, or I'm going to come out probably with this amount of loans and this amount of debt. Like, is everybody weighing in on what they're willing to contribute here, willing to pay, able to pay, those type of conversations? And I know with, Danny and Derry, you guys are great about coaching people through this. So, I mean, I would say, first of all, if you're at Kentucky Country Day, you really are lucky to have the resources you have in your counseling office. But help them to walk you through and facilitate those type of conversations if you're not already having them. But I talk to a lot of students. I just talked to a neighbor the other day who, lives here in my neighborhood. I want you to know I was observing social distancing when we had this conversation out in the street. And she's been admitted to one school that's about 300 miles from here, and then, a school that's about 50 miles from here. And for them right now, that's actually been a big part of the conversation. And just the other day, her mom was saying, and maybe it's because of kind of where we find ourselves right now from everything's been sort of thrown up in the air with, health and, this kind of worldwide pandemic that we have. But she's like, I just feel better about you being closer to home and here near some of the hospitals and with the doctors that we know. Like, for their family, that's a very real, honest conversation. And I think you're making a big decision. And while, along the way, you might have felt like you were on the same page, it is absolutely worth touching base back now before you make a decision to just confirm that that's the case. Because everybody is part of your success in college, and everybody should be heard and, opinions considered as it relates to some of these things. Major being another one. I hear a lot of families having conversations around not even so much the particular school, but what you're going to actually study at that place and which place is better, quote unquote, or, you can determine has routes to the goals that you have for the particular major that you're interested in. We're going to take some questions or take a bit of a pause here in a second, but back to kind of where we find ourselves now as a senior considering choices. What I would tell you is admission offices around the country are really good at producing like perfectly, infographic, shiny, happy, glossy images and like a very marketing type of message, whether that be through their brochures, whether that be through their website, and certainly through their social media. Now that you've been admitted, what I would tell you is you should be looking at the social media, not of the admission office. I mean, it's fine to still look at that. They sometimes have good information. But be looking at, if you want to play rugby in college, if you want to be part of like the, Spanish study abroad, group or whatever you're interested in, go find those clubs or organizations of the schools you're interested in, because they are not talking to you on purpose. They'll talk to you if you interact with them, but otherwise they're talking to each other. They're not really trying to recruit students. They're trying to help each other connect, tell what's going on. And if you'll kind of go look at their Instagram or their, Snapchat or Twitter page or whatever it might be, you're going to get a very unvarnished, very real, very kind of organic, true sense of what that community is like. So I would tell you to dig a little deeper. You don't have to, like it or join it or follow it, but just go check it out, because that is one of the best sources for like getting a real sense of these places you've been admitted to. Don't trust people like me as much as you might have to this point. The other thing I would say on that same note is thinking about school newspapers. So, if you go to the Kentucky Country Day newspaper, they're not trying, you guys, when you're putting out stuff, are not trying to recruit new fifth graders or new eighth graders to come to Kentucky Country Day. You're just telling what's going on there at KCD from a day-to-day standpoint. And so if I'm a family living in the Louisville area, that would be a great place to go, is look at what KCD newspaper is talking about. Then I have a sense of, what's happening, what the community looks and feels like, what people are really talking about when they're not spinning stuff for recruitment. Similarly, alumni magazines. I mean, yes, those are pretty glossy and shiny and all of that, but they're going to be talking about alumni and what they've accomplished. They're going to be talking about what's happening on campus. And I guess my point is, like, in these settings, whether it be social media or whether it be through the writing or the articles, be it in newspapers or alumni magazines, they're not talking to you on purpose. And that's a really good thing for you to cut through some of the, I guess, spin or marketing that you usually find, especially from admission offices, which to this point might be largely what you've been hearing. So anyway, I've been talking for a little while. Kenny, I just wanted to pause and see if there's anything that you have questions about or wanted to echo, or if there's any questions from students.
Yeah, Rick, one question we have is, are there certain types of visits that you feel like gives students a truer sense of the school? Um, and I know that that's kind of changed right now, obviously virtually. But can you think of like maybe someone a student could reach out to, or something a student could do with the resources that's available to them now that would give them a good true sense of the school? I know you mentioned Twitter and some of the social media. Are there some other things as far as kind of virtual visits and things like that, since a lot of the traditional ways of visiting campus through admitted student programs and things like that aren't available now?
Yeah, absolutely. I clicked off of my share screen for this, if that's okay. And hopefully you're seeing me back.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, actually, we were just talking about this. I mean, I actually think that like my team and admission teams in general are far more available now than they would have been otherwise. I actually think in some ways this is a positive thing for seniors, even though I mean I hate for seniors the way that seasons have been messed up and prom isn't going to happen or all these traditions. I mean that just sucks. And there's no other way to put it. That's just the bottom line. But as it relates to getting in touch with admission offices, I mean like our staff is on email now. We're doing more calls. We're putting out more regional webinars for admitted students. I actually think you're going to find it easier to get in touch with admission folks and students. Like I was talking to the editor of our school newspaper yesterday, and she's been talking to faculty and other people around campus. And what they're saying is like our students are replying really fast because they're not doing all the stuff they normally do. Now with faculty, I think that's going to vary a little bit more. I don't know that I'm quite as confident to say, yes, you're going to hear back immediately from a faculty member. I think that would vary from institution to institution. But for admission folks and for current students, and really, I mean, one of the best things to do is find ways to connect. And here again, I would say, thinking about a KCD, one of the real strengths that you all have as a community is you send kids lots of schools. And so, if your seniors are admitted to places where there's KCD alums, A, they might be actually home now. You could talk to them that way. But B, they're probably more available than they would be otherwise because there's all that other stuff's not going on. And so, yeah, I actually think in this particular environment, this particular spring, you might find it easier to get in touch with various people at these colleges.
Great. Yeah, that's a great point. I have a question. When you're with your conversations that you have with students who choose Georgia Tech, and I know you can just speak specifically to Georgia Tech, but this might become kind of might be broadly interpreted as well. Do you find that there are one or two key things that a lot of students, a lot of seniors make their final decision based off of? Do you know what I mean? Is there something common that comes up, at least with your conversations with the Georgia Tech students, and it might just give our students an idea of something to look for or to ask questions about as they kind of make their final decisions?
Yeah, no, that's good. I would say that one of the things we hear, I mean, well, two things I would say. One is everything that's happening in Atlanta is a big thing. I think now, granted, a lot of times kids come here and they really see that, but you can still find all of this. I mean, like this idea that you're seeing companies that are moving their innovation hubs right into Midtown. You're seeing like Atlanta United selling, more tickets to soccer games than, most clubs in the world. And there's just this like real energy and invigoration that's happening in our area. That's not just like athletics and it's not just corporate. I mean, it's like the city is really on the rise in a new and kind of different way. And so that is certainly one of the things that we hear from a lot of students. Like that's what tipped the scales for them is not even so much Georgia Tech per se, but like the momentum of the city. And again, while you may not tangibly see that right now because you can't physically come, there's still so many places where those indicators are out there. The other one I would say is this idea of like entrepreneurism, and students being able to launch their ideas. So that's another thing I hear from a lot of students. Like they really feel like the ecosystem at Tech and around Tech is very much an accelerator, incubator, like get your ideas off the ground type of place. And so, I guess as you try to extrapolate that out for other schools, like what are those things, whether it be, as I said, like social media, alumni magazines, school newspapers, like what are those common themes you keep hearing over and over again? You see it over and over again because like those threads, that's what community really is. And I'm, thinking about your own environment there at KCD, everybody might have a bit of a different experience, but there are some things about that place that everybody would say, "Oh yeah, that's KCD, right? Those are the traits and characteristics of the school, no matter what sport you're into or what you most enjoy from an academic standpoint."
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
All right.
So we touched on this a little bit, but the other thing I would just say is exactly what you just asked about. Ask your questions. Unfortunately, in information sessions and unfortunately on tours, we will just like pull a cord in the back of our back and like start talking. Admission people are really good at giving the spiel. They're really good about throwing out statistics and telling stories and history and traditions, and that's all fine and good, but like you may not care. You really might not care, like how many volumes there are in the library or how many national championships a school has won. You may just not be into that at all. Like, what do you care about? So if the information session doesn't talk about the business school and you want to major in business, you need to be asking questions about the business school. If and I think this is particularly true when students are physically on campus, like these tours will go all around campus and never go near what you're going to really see on a day-to-day basis. Your job as a senior who's been admitted to multiple schools is to be a researcher, is to dig a little deeper and to ask your very specific personal questions. What do you care about? And you owe it to yourself after all of this to get those answers. And as I said earlier, the good news is I would say admission folks and current students, I should have added that here, are more available than ever before. So don't just take what they give you, get those specific individual questions. The only other thing I was going to kind of say here, I thought this was just maybe relevant to the current environment we find ourselves in, is there's a lot of uncertainty on the college side too. If I'm a senior in high school right now, I'm kind of trying to figure out how this is all working, and colleges are doing the same thing. And so I did want to make this one comment to say, a lot of students are finding themselves on wait lists right now. So you might be a senior who is weighing your options because of what you've been admitted to, but you've also got this other one or two that they're sort of in the like side line for a second because you don't know, you haven't been denied, you've been waitlisted, and you're kind of keeping that out there. My prediction, and Danny and Derry, you guys may see things differently than I do, but in talking to a lot of my colleagues around the country, first of all, schools, especially if they were releasing decisions when coronavirus was becoming more of a reality, are building bigger wait lists than they ever have before. And I mean, I hate to say that, but I do think it's true, because they have a yield model that they've always used to predict who's going to come. And that is trashed right now. They really, I will say, don't really know. And here's a good example. What if these consulates and embassies don't reopen and they can't admit, they can't give visas to international students. Well, they're going to need to pull more waitlisted students in from the US in order to do that. Similarly, I would say, like, even before coronavirus, because of some of the Department of Justice stuff that y'all may have gotten into with your students, like, I already thought schools were going to hold on to their wait list longer. I know we are. We usually try to get rid of our wait list by June 1 because we feel like if we can do that and make our class, students can move on and other schools can start to make their class. We were already planning on holding it further into June to see how melt, which is students who have deposited, if they fall off, summer melt, might go up because of DOJ stuff. With coronavirus, I could see double depositing being more common this year. I could see variance occurring in the models. So if you're a waitlisted student right now, it always sucks to be on the wait list, but I think you also need to be, I guess, open to or just aware of the fact that A, I could see some schools pulling more students in April. B, you're going to need to put down your deposit at some point, and then you'll need to decide if you're open or not to waiting longer for particular schools. And obviously, the longer the summer goes, the harder that is to do. But I just want to be as transparent with you as possible to tell you the mentality that's going on the admission side. And we can talk about, yeah.
Rick, I would echo that. I know we've talked with Darian. I've talked with numerous college admissions reps here over the last week or so, and that have just released decisions, and that seems to be their take on things as well. That they seem to they anticipate leaning on their wait list more this year than they have in the past. We'll see how that turns out, but that seems to be the message that we're getting as well.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I just think you would be crazy to be an admission director, an enrollment person, and not think that, there's like factors way beyond what you're even considering. And so, unfortunately, I mean, waitlist, I think, is like the 8th level of admission purgatory, but it is what it is. There's not much more to say. Let's see. I guess what I want to start with here is, Danny, I know you are a Lost fan. If you find yourself at age 17 or 18 as a senior in high school and you've not had the opportunity to watch all seasons of Lost, which happens to be the greatest TV show ever made, then thank goodness for coronavirus, because you now have the opportunity to binge watch. Again, probably one of the best things created in the modern era. So I want to start with that. At the top, that is from Lost, so put it on your list. But I do think running the numbers, you start broad, right, and you start zoomed out, but at some point you got to get into, okay, here are my choices. Here's my 2. Here's my 3. Like, how am I going to narrow them down? How am I going to make a final choice? A couple of the things I would point to that I think are of value, and you may not agree, and that may not matter as much to you, but I would point you to at least know, and that would be retention rates. Again, with good counseling there, I know you guys have talked about this, but how many students come back from year to year? The average national retention rate now for 4-year schools nationally is about 67%, meaning 2 out of every 3 students at 4-year schools come back. Check out what your school options retention rates are. And then what you should do is ask a follow-up question, because there's always a number beneath the number. And the number beneath the number, or the question beneath the number of retention rates is, well, why are you losing students? So a school might be like, well, we have a 90% retention rate. We have an 85% retention rate. Well, first of all, that's a lot higher than the national average. But you might as well ask, like, why are they leaving? Is it because after year 1 they can't afford it as much? Is it because after year 1, they're not finding that the major they want is there, or that it's as good as they thought it was going to be? You're going to have to figure out how to get honest answers to that question. But around the country, like, the highest retention rates you'll see are somewhere in the high 90s. Most schools, are going to come in the 80s and 70s. And probably a lot of the schools you all have been admitted to have pretty good retention rates. But ask that question. Graduation rates would be the same thing. you know, 4-year graduation rates are one thing, and depending on the school you've been admitted to, those might be really high. But ask the question beneath the number, or look for the number beneath the number, and that is also ask about their 5 and 6 year graduation rates. And I can speak to this at Georgia Tech. Like, our 4-year graduation rate is 50%. And so if you looked at that and you're like, okay, I've been admitted to Georgia Tech at 50%, I'll just pick on Danny's alma mater of Notre Dame, and they probably have close to 100% or 4-year graduation rate, because that's just the way Notre Dame rolls. Like, that is their mission, that is their model. And so I bet you they have an extremely high 4-year graduation rate. Well, that's not Georgia Tech's goal. We are trying to, get students plugged into some of these co-op programs, which is really big here, where students might be working 3, sometimes 4 semesters. And so the 4-year graduation rate is 50, but then you look at the 5 and 6 year graduation rates, and that's going up into the 80s or close to 90. So don't get the numbers, but don't always assume they're apples to apples. Okay, hey, I see your graduation rate for 4 years 60, your graduation rate for 6 years is 70. Why aren't students graduating? Ask that question. Faculty student ratios, I think that's like one of the worst numbers in all of college admission, because there's so much crap in that number. Crap, of course, being a technical term. But I would definitely ask a better question around that, which is, what's the most common class size? And then also, like, I'm going to be a chemistry major. What's the average class size for chemistry majors? And then what does that look like in my first year? And what does that look like in my 4th year? So, for instance, a school might have a 17-to-1 faculty student ratio, or student faculty ratio, 17-to-1. But like, that's got people who are on sabbatical in it. That's got people who might only teach grad students or one class, or, whatever. So don't take that number at face value. Dig a little deeper. And then lastly, of course, is money and return on investment. And, of course, it's good to get this stuff on a spreadsheet and really consider, and we talked about this earlier, how much is it going to cost me to go? What's that going to look like for our family? What are the trade-offs? Does this mean I'm going to need to take debt or go into loans? And if I am, what's my tolerance for doing that? Those are the key kind of questions to be asking. And then, Danny and Derry, I'll leave this to you guys, because you're the experts that work with way more families on this than I do. But I mean, I have to say, I feel like if there's ever a year for students or families to be willing to go back to schools and ask them, to, is there more you can do? Or do you guys probably already know the schools that are and are not willing to have those conversations. But things have changed a lot, for a lot of families from a financial standpoint. And there is a lot of uncertainty for colleges. And so I guess I would just say, talk to your counselors about your particular options, and whether or not there's a possibility of having those reconsidered by the college you've been admitted to. But I'll stay in my lane on that and let y'all handle that one. I guess the last couple of thoughts. One is this, like, one of my biggest hopes is, wherever you've been admitted and whatever decision you make, that it's actually your decision, that it's not pressure to choose a certain place because that's where you quote unquote should go, because it's the place that like is ranked the highest or looks the best or is the most selective. Like, being honest with yourself and considering, where do I want to go? And does that line up with those big questions that we talked about earlier? And just being willing to kind of follow that. And I guess, not to get too philosophical, but man, I feel like this is one of your first opportunities to be honest with yourself and make a decision that's really yours. Because it is a sad, sad life for people that go through life continuing to make decisions that aren't theirs, but other people's. So I won't preach about that too much. The other thing I would just say is, when what one tactic or one technique or one whatever trick, I guess, that I would tell you is, right now you've got, let's say, 3 schools you've been admitted to. just go ahead and pretend for 2 days each that you're going to that one school, right? So you got into the University of Kentucky, you're thinking about going to the University of Kentucky. Let's just mentally decide that that's where you're going. And for 2 days, you're going to University of Kentucky in your head and in your heart. All right, then switch it up to another school. Like for 2 days, sit with that. This is where you're going. Like, I mean, there's a feel part of this. I guess we've walked through the quantitative and we've walked through the sort of research thing. Now I'm sort of more to the emotional side of things to say, sit with that decision mentally. And there's a term for this in psychology. I'm blanking on it right now. But this idea of like, I've already made the decision in my mind. Now, how does that sort of feel? And am I at peace with that? Am I content with that? And then the last one is sort of a reference to Cortez when he came to Mexico from Spain. And when they landed on the beaches, like a lot of his men were homesick and they were missing, their families and all this, and they were on a mission. And so he just said, burn the ships. In other words, like once you make a decision, don't second guess it. Move on, get excited about it, like burn the other shirts or donate the other shirts to Goodwill from schools you were thinking about, and go forward. And there again, like I feel like that's a good life thing too. When you make a decision, don't keep looking back on it. Get excited about it and move forward. So that's kind of what I had generally prepared. Happy to take questions. And then we can wrap up with one last section of a couple slides.
Rick, I think we're good. We don't have any questions at this point. You've covered most of the things that we needed.
All right, cool. Great. Well, then I'll just hit on these last couple of things. Like again, this question, like, what is success? What are you going to feel the best about in your decision? If you have not, as a student, taken some time to actually tell your parents two things, thank you and I love you. I hope you're doing that every day. They have facilitated a lot of your success. You definitely haven't gotten there alone. There's a old Georgia political phrase, which is if you see a turtle on a fence post, it didn't get there on its own. And sometimes we fool ourselves into believing we did it all ourselves. So I hope that you'll take some time. You've got it right now. You're with your parents. Hopefully in some of those moments where you're not driving them crazy or they're not driving you crazy, you'll just say thank you and I love you and keep on doing that. Thanks for, you may be really good at soccer right now, but you freaking were terrible when you were 4 and they still endured that and kept driving you to practice. Or whatever instrument you're good at now, it was like just a bunch of screechy noise for a long time and they kept paying for lessons. So please tell them thank you and I love you. Last thing I want to close with is, as you can see in this particular picture, I'm making a really important point, probably one of the most brilliant and cogent ideas that's ever really been postulated. And the girl from Emory, is really disgusted by this. She either that or I have something really gross on my hands. So, then frankly, I think one of the best parts about this picture is the girl who flew across the Pacific Ocean all the way from University of Melbourne to hear me talk. And man, she is severely questioning life decisions right now. The guy from University of California, San Diego is looking at something. I'm not going to judge him. Not sure what he's doing there, but we'll move on. My point is, I often make a lot of great points, and as you can see, people don't always agree. So if you've been listening to this and you're like, man, this guy is full of crap, like I'm not going to do it that way. I'm not going to run the numbers. I'm not going to watch Lost. I'm just going to like, roll some dice and go with it. Just want you to know you're in good company. Like you would not be the first. Lots of people disagree with me. It happens in my home every day. And it definitely happens in the college admission world. So I appreciate your time. And Danny, thanks for having me.
Thanks so much, Rick. I was wondering where you were going to go with that slide when I saw your presentation earlier. That's a classic.
Oh
I
man.
wish I knew exactly what you were saying right there, because there are some pretty disgusting looks on those people's faces.
Oh man, it's so funny because I had that one and then literally that other one is just from a couple weeks ago. So this seems to be it's a trend with me.
Rick, tell everybody, we didn't get a chance. You have a book that you wrote. I was going to give you a chance to maybe talk about that, and also that KCD is mentioned in the book.
Yeah, man, absolutely. So the book is called The Truth About College Admission, a family guide to getting in and staying together. And, I wrote it with a good friend and a colleague up in New Hampshire named Brendan Barnard, who writes for Forbes a lot. And so I'm sure you've probably shared some of his stuff. But, if you're a parent, especially, if you have younger kids too and are going to go back through this again, like I highly recommend anything he writes. And we feel like we put a pretty good book out there. I mean, it's the basics. I'm sure it's a lot of what you guys talk about all the time. We don't think we, did anything novel here. We just tried to synthesize a lot of the key things. And more than anything, like we tried to just keep family in the middle of it because, I know what you guys see and what I see too often is this can really like divide people. And that's sad to me because I believe this is really exciting and it's an adventure and it's actually an opportunity for people to grow as individuals and as a family too. And so, the book to us is all about helping families go through this in a healthy way with hopefully a little bit of perspective and maybe at times some levity too. But yeah, you also contributed some great stuff like the blind college fair. I know we quoted you in on that, and I feel like there was at least one other thing that you're in there on.
Yeah, I highly recommend it to all of our families. I think it's a really great for all different levels, from ninth grade all the way up into senior year, as far as giving good perspective. And like you said, keeping kind of family as the focus in the middle of it. It can be it's a really helpful guide. So
Yeah, appreciate it.
Well, thanks, Rick, for doing this. We really appreciate it.
Rick.
We're going to send this out to our students, and I'm sure that they will. I'm sure they'll have better looks on their faces than some of those other.
Let's hope so. Let's hope so, man.
All right. Thanks a lot. It's good to see you. Good chat.
Yeah,
Good chat.
thanks.
Be safe.
All right. Thanks for having me.
See ya.